Well, hello and welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. London-born keyboardist-songwriter Steve Weber began his musical odyssey as a member of late 60s psych band Geranium Pond. The band did not release an album, but it did record a few demos, which have resurfaced on various artist compilations. Steve then met fellow songwriter Alan Morgan, and the two were hired as staff songwriters by Apple Publishing in 1968. Shortly thereafter, the duo wrote a couple of songs as Promise, but they were never released. Promise then signed with Nems Publishing and did issue a single in 1969. In recent years, some of the demos recorded at Apple Studios have appeared on various artist comps. Steve then moved on to join the band Welcome and recorded a few demos on Pi. Since that time, Steve has stayed in the music business on TV broadcasts, music shows, pantomime, theater, and as part of the band Space Pigs. We're going to find out a lot more about this in the upcoming chat with Steve. Welcome, Steve.
Hi.
Nice to see you. So you were born in London. Talk about your childhood and upbringing there.
Well, so I was born in 1950 and grew up right in the centre of London. I mean, we lived a stone's throw from Marble Arch. So I was right sort of in the centre when, I was 16 in 1966, which was where everything was happening, swinging London, as they say. I was right in the middle of it, and it was great fun. Yeah.
Do you recall when you were younger, the music being played in your house?
Yeah, I mean, my mother played piano, and we often used to sit around the piano and sing songs. She loved musicals. And a lot of old time music hall, but my parents were quite sort of trendy at the time, but I suppose the big singers, I mean, she was really into Sinatra, Fitzgerald. I mean, those were her probably favorite singers. So it was a real, mixed musical background. And then, obviously the 60s came along, and I mean, they were swept up in all of that, and they loved the Beatles as well, and everything else. So it was, when I sort of announced that I was going to join a band and be a musician, they were actually very supportive. They supported me for about 4 years, and I never made any money at all. Then forced me to go out and get a real job. Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, I'm hearing that from some of the others that I've interviewed, that their parents were very supportive, because you always hear that story about, get a real job,
Yeah.
This is not going to support you, so that's great. And there wasn't so much of a generation gap, it sounds like, there, since they like the Beatles also. So yeah, that's. Do you remember the radio, listening to that when you were younger too?
Not really. I suppose we did, but I don't have a real memory of that. I mean, I tended to listen to music when people came around. Yeah, I mean,
and being around the piano.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think, is that why you think you tended to lean in that direction, playing the piano, because your mother was versed at it?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and made me have piano lessons from a very early age. And I never practiced enough, which is still apparent. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, you couldn't tell today, or from what I've heard. So
I only got to what they call here grade 5 in exams, which is not that brilliant. Because then you learn classical music, and I never learned to. It was odd, you'd learn to read music, but never really how to apply it. And then I went for some lessons with somebody that my mother had found that could teach me jazz. And I only went for a couple of lessons, but because he was a terrible teacher. But those lessons, the penny dropped. It was all, because I knew it all, I just didn't know how to apply it. Yeah. And it was like, oh, that's what you do. Yeah. And suddenly the sort of light went on, and it was, I can do that. Yeah. It was quite weird. Yeah.
Well, it was like a aha moment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that. Okay, so
Yeah.
can you remember your first single or album that you got?
I don't. You asked that before. I don't. I thought the first single I think was "Telstar" by the Tornadoes, because I had a Farfisa chord organ. It's a tiny little organ with a fan inside it and buttons for chords. I mean, somewhere between an organ and an accordion. A very, very weird thing, but it actually sounded very close to what the Telstar sound was. And I learned to play that on that funny little organ. And then sort of rapidly got fed up with that and wanted a better keyboard. And I mean, keyboards were expensive. And then I can't remember whether I think then I got something called a Pianotron, which was like a very early electric piano, which was great because at least you can amplify it. It sounded horrible. I mean, it had reeds in it that were plucked by things, so it sort of made the sound. So there was no finesse to it at all. I mean, it didn't matter how hard or soft you played it. That was it. But it was a bit, sounded somewhere between a xylophone and vibes, but it was a keyboard and it played. So that was good. And then I got a horrible Hohner organ, just a single manual. And I used to put the Pianotron on top of that. And in fact, the organ never even had at the time a proper output. So I used to put a microphone in front of the speaker or under the organ.
Really?
It's amazing it worked. Anything worked. It was a really cheap microphone as well. And it sort of worked, and it made a decent sound. I mean, and I used that for quite a while. Well, I think I used it all through Geranium Pond. What I hated most of all with the Pianotron was that because it had such a unique sound, you tend to use it for nice little solo-y bits or unique bits in songs, and sometimes little reeds never hit the notes and they didn't sound. And it was always at a really important bit. You had to play something. And you're like, and it didn't work. I remember actually kicking it off the top of the organ once on the stage. I was just so fed up with it. Oh, that's sod this. A real Who moment. Yeah.
I've heard some interesting stories about self-made amplifiers and what people did back in the early days, to amplify that sound. That's very interesting. Well, so what were some artists and bands that you mentioned, getting Telstar? What were some other artists and bands that you liked as a teen growing up?
Oh, crikey. Santana. I loved Hendrix, obviously. The Nice, Keith Emerson. Funnily enough, just before you came on, I'd just been watching an interview with Al Cooper about Blood, Sweat and Tears. I love Blood, Sweat and Tears, are one of my favorite bands. I don't know. I mean, to way I sort of lent towards, obviously, sort of keyboardy things. I mean, Arthur Brown and those sorts of bands, Pink Floyd, really very, very mixed taste. And I've actually found as time's gone on, I mean, there were bands around at the time that I never really fully appreciated. I mean, obviously, the Doors they were one of my biggest influences, actually. I mean, my piano style is keyboard style is based on Ray Manzarek of the Doors, and bass players hate me. I play a bass line with my left hand, and that's gone on because an awful lot of the time, it's only relatively recently that I've got back into sort of playing in bands to a degree again. So an awful lot of stuff I've been playing on my own, or certainly without a bass player. So I've always had a heavy left hand. And it's very difficult to get out of that habit.
Right, that habit. You've been used to doing that, yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. But certainly Doors and Love, and they were the primary influences in Geranium Pond. But then sort of subsequently, listening to people like Booker T, and those sorts of people that I really, love. Yeah.
So Geranium Pond was really heavily influenced by that West Coast sound.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've heard that had a large influence on a lot of bands as well. Can you remember the first gig that you ever went to?
The first gig I ever went to, proper gig.
Yeah.
I think I'll be trying to work this out. I actually think it was the Beatles.
Oh, okay.
I think so. I can't remember anything before that. It was a Beatles Christmas show, and I went with my cousin. And I think that was the first proper gig. I think I'd heard bands, obviously, and not particularly well-known bands at various places I'd been to with my parents and lots of things. I mean, it was unusual at that time because my parents, we traveled abroad a lot for holidays, which was, relatively unusual, at that time. I mean, we used to go every year from, I think, the age of about 7 or 8, even if not before, to Italy every year or somewhere. And so there were always, we stayed in hotels and there were bands playing in those hotels, or we go to, they take me to nightclubs, even at that sort of age, and I'd hear bands. But I think the first well-known band I think actually was the Beatles. I don't know. Difficult to remember that far back.
Well, I won't quote you on that then.
Yeah.
We'll just go with that.
Yeah.
Was Geranium Pond your first band, or were you in?
I was in bands at school. Yeah. And I think from the age of, from secondary school, so probably from about 11 or 12 thereabouts, and I played in a couple of bands.
Okay, that's early.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
Pretty, yeah. So you had that itch early on.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Geranium Pond, talk about how you guys came together and who came up with the name. I answered an advertisement in Melody Maker, and although, as I said before, that my biggest influences were the Doors and the Love, I think the advertisement, a lot of this I'm remembering now because you're asking me. These are all things that have completely gone. There was an advertisement in Melody Maker, and it said somebody that loves the Doors and Love. And to be honest, I'd never ever heard Doors and Love. I just knew that they were West Coast bands, and I thought, yeah, I like that. And answered the ad and went for an audition. The band had already been put together by a chap called John Edwards, who was their manager. So it was manufactured up to a point. And those singles that had been not released, but had been recorded, had been done before I joined
the band. And in fact, they were all session musicians. I think apart from the singer, I don't think any of the guys played on them. Because I remember going into a studio literally as I joined them, and there were people playing. Oh, all right, that's the way it's done. And then I think
John Edwards was a DJ also, right?
That's right. Yeah. Okay. And also was responsible for inventing subsequently Metal Mickey.
Oh, okay.
Which were a series of shows directed by Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees.
Yes.
Yeah. And I believe, again, the first gig I played with Geranium Pond was at the Savile Theatre in London, which was a big gig, and supporting the New Animals and I think Dan Tallien's Chariots, which was can't remember the keyboard player. Alexis, I don't know, it's gone. But I remember even then saying because in those days, I mean, you had 30-watt amplifiers, and it was. I don't think my amplifier was even 30 watts. I think it might even have been 15. I would say it's not going to be loud enough. No, it's fine. So you go to this massive theatre with an amplifier that's got the output of a transistor radio, and you're supposed to fill it. I mean, even now it makes me laugh. I mean, with bands with their monitor speakers and goodness knows what else. I mean, the amplifier I've got now is I think 600 watts. I guess what? Like, who needs 600 watts? I mean, we went on stage with all these bands. I think even when we were with Welcome, which was like an 8-piece band, we had 200-watt PA Marshall's PAs. I mean, one for the brass and one for the vocals, but 2 100-watt PAs is still 100 watts, no matter which way you cut it, and it's nowhere near as loud as 100 watts would be today, where everything is that much more efficient and the speakers are better and everything else. Yeah, so it makes me laugh.
It's interesting. Yeah, we've kind of gone to the other extreme with excess these days. Like you don't need that much.
Yeah, and then it's all gone back down again with in-ear monitors and people playing very softly on stage. And I've never tried that, but it's we'll see. It's bound to come.
Well, now you said the demos were session musicians recorded those? Okay.
That recorded the Geranium Pond. They weren't demos. They were supposed to be proper records for release, which were recorded. I think they were Abbey Road. I might be wrong, but either Abbey Road or Decca Studios. I really can't remember. And they were never released, basically. But they were finished records. I remember dogs in baskets and elephants in my garden, I think. Yeah.
Right. Do you know what the inspiration for that song was? I was going to ask.
They were written by a guy called Ray Singer that was in a band called Nirvana, but they were a different Nirvana, predated.
Right. I'm familiar with them. I'm familiar.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was all sort of done before I joined them, basically. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's not good to ask you about that, where that came from. But I like but I did want to comment. That was the first song I ever heard from Geranium Pond.
Yeah.
And it was on, of course, a various artists compilation.
Yeah.
Another song, the cover of Fire, I thought was Ray's.
That's right. That we did play on.
Okay, you did play.
Yeah,
I like
that
Ray,
we did play on.
Ray's drumming is real solid on that.
Yeah.
One. Yeah. So what about Marshmallow Man parts 1 and 2?
I'd forgotten those. Again, they were, I think, Ray Singer songs. Yeah. So they were again pretty much done before I joined the band. Yeah.
Did you play keyboards in No Elephants in My Garden? Was that
No.
you?
No.
No.
Yeah.
That was a really nice jazzy
Yeah.
instrumental
Yeah.
track. Yeah, I like that one as well. What? Why were no singles or an album ever released? Do you have any?
I don't know
Ideas?
what happened to the recording contract. Nothing was ever released.
Yeah.
And I mean, I suppose that was down to John Edwards, who was managing us. And I have no idea what happened. I mean, you know, the band trundled on for about a year. I mean, up and down the country playing gigs for, you know, next to no money. And the other guys, I mean, I was lucky. I was living at home, but they were. I mean, they you know, they had to get proper jobs and whatever. So it just ran out of steam and money. I mean, there were some notable firsts that Geranium Pond did, which people forget, or we never knew. They forget. Most people didn't know. We were one of the first bands ever to have strobes. And we had to get those made because you couldn't buy them back in those days. So actually had to get those made. I had a very, very early version of, I was going to say a synthesizer, actually. It was a sine wave generator with a knob on the front, you know, so I suppose a bit like a theremin. We used smoke on stage, which again, nobody really did back then. And in those days, I was telling somebody the other day, it was horrible chemical stuff. I mean, you put this powder in a thing, and then you put a big bit of fuse wire across the bottom and fire it with the thing. And occasionally you could blow all the fuses in the club you were playing in if you were lucky. And this stuff plainly must have been unbelievably carcinogenic because it was horrible. And the first time we'd ever used it, we had no idea. It was at a rehearsal, and we had no idea how much powder to put in. And that put an end to the rehearsal because we just blew this thing. There was more smoke than you could ever believe. We just had to, you know, go outside and wait for it to clear because it was, oh, that's how it works. Okay. You know? Maybe we won't use as much next time.
Well, you were trailblazers in that area. You led the way for so many other bands.
Yeah. And we wore makeup and
yeah. I was going to ask you about that. Whose idea was the makeup? Whose idea was
I think it was John Edwards, to be fair. Yeah.
Okay. And you played live gigs like that with the makeup?
Absolutely, yes.
Right.
I went on stage. I had a long Victorian white night dress, yeah, and painted my face completely white, yeah, which was great, except when you came off stage in most of the clubs and places we played, there were no washing facilities or anything like that. And you just couldn't get the bloody stuff off. It was just, it was horrible.
So how long would it take for it actually to come off?
It never came off. Yeah, it just got greasy, you know. I had hair down to there, and we'd backcomb it all, so it was like an afro. You know.
Oh God. Well, speaking of gigs, do you recall supporting the Nice? Do you recall that?
Yes, I do. I think, what band? What was that? I think that was with Welcome. I think, because at that time I can't remember what keyboard I had. I think then with Welcome, I think it might have been a Farfisa. Continental. I never had a Hammond, and I always wanted a Hammond. Yeah. And I remember putting my kit on stage. We turned up at a club in the East End of London, and we were both, I think, equally billed, and we got there first. And we each had to do 2 sets, and we decided to play the first set and the middle set because it was a fairly young crowd, and we figured by the end a lot of the kids would have gone home. So we thought the first and the middle set was probably the best bet. So I got all of my kit on stage, and then the Nice turn up, one in a nice big big van as opposed to our, rusted metal, and they had a roadie as well, and they had a Hammond. I mean, I was pissed off to start with, and then rolled all this stuff onto the stage. And instantly it's in my way. And I said, to the guy up to the keyboard, look, it's in my way, mate, shift it. And it was actually, I got to say, really, really nice. Oh no problem. Pushed all this stuff out of the way. We go on and we play the first set, and we will go to the, afterwards we come up and we go to the back of the hall, and I'm followed by Keith Emerson. I'm thinking, I've got to go back on after that. And the rest of the band are looking at me saying, you need a Hammond. And I said, yeah, I need more than that. To be fair, they blew us away. And then we supported them a couple of other times, because we played a lot on what was then the college circuit, which was where all the big bands used to play. And they got progressively more famous, and we sort of progressively didn't. But no, they were fabulous, man. I loved Keith Emerson.
Right, yeah, and then going on to Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Yeah,
I mean, he was something else.
Yeah,
on the keyboard. Wow.
But I did eventually get a Hammond, so it was all right.
it all worked out.
Yeah.
Well, I want to hear if you have any recollections on this gig, on this. I guess it's one show. The Brunel at the Roundhouse. The Moon,
yes.
Crazy World of Arthur Brown. Early
Everybody.
Mac and Fairport.
Yeah.
What a
everybody was on that show.
Wow. I would have loved to have seen that show.
Yeah. And I think tickets were only £1 or something like that. You look back. I mean, Geranium Pond were basically a cover band. I mean, we didn't really do any of our own material. And so, I mean, we played, I think there were certainly more than one stage. And everybody was, was on that bill, and we played and that was it. I mean, we played on a few big shows like that. And when I sort of look back and say, I made a list at one time of all the bands that I'd seen, and an awful lot of them I'd actually played support to at some point. I remember actually seeing Pink Floyd in the very, very early days and thinking, what a load of rubbish. Mind you, to be fair, the venue was a load of rubbish. But when they had Sid Barrett, but I'd never seen a light show before. It was the first time I'd seen a light show. And I was blown away by the lights. But they were actually playing in a hall that was a swimming pool. So the sound, I mean, they had no chance. But I know that then we played, I remember playing a gig at a place in London called either Royal Court or Olympia, one of the big exhibition halls. And we went on, I think Status Quo were on the bill, and this was after Sid Barrett had left the Pink Floyd, and his band were on there, and they were dreadful, to be fair. And then Sid Barrett went off and did I think he went crazy at that point. But going back to Kit, I remember we were playing with Orange. They had the amplification on stage, so we only had to bring a thing in, and they were, I think, 500 watt Orange amplifiers with 16 by 12 cabinets. I mean, these were like 7 foot tall speaker cabinets. And as most keyboards will tell you, keyboard players, you sit where you got room, and invariably that's with a speaker cabinet in your ear. Whereas unlike a guitarist who can move around and can actually, get an idea of what everything else sounds like. I remember I couldn't hear the drums. I was actually watching,
oh my God.
the drums, because you're just completely blasted away.
Did they have earplugs back then?
No. anything. My hearing is seriously shot away, you know.
I know
and,
mine.
and it's still the same problem, you know. And I play now, and you know, I think, you know, this is bad. Yeah,
I know mine is from going to so many concerts over the years. I know mine's not
yeah,
not up to par. I noticed. You know, early Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green. I would have died to see.
yeah.
To have seen that. You know.
You know, and it's funny. A lot of that I don't remember. You know, I mean, because when you're in a band, you do your bit, and then you walk off, and you don't. You know, who knew? Because they weren't particularly well known then, or anything. And you just, you know, you went off, and I went to the bar and was chatting to people. It was just the band playing off in the background.
Right.
So you know, yeah.
Have a crystal ball, look into the future, and say, "Oh wow."
Yeah.
You know.
Who knew? You know. Yeah, it was like, it's always, you know, if you like a band back then or even subsequently, it's, if you like them, the minute you like them, it's the kiss of death, you know, because you know they'll sink without a trace.
Right.
And I go back in, I'm just moving forward in the 80s. I worked with a company. We were the largest producers of live rock shows for TV.
Okay.
And we produce 3 bands every week for a series. I remember that my partner in the company then, you met a guy called Philip Goodhand Tate, and Philip was actually quite well known at one time as an artist. We used to joke. I mean, the minute we liked the band, it was instantly the kiss of death. You know, they would sink without a trace. You know. So
well, that's interesting because that's when I really got into music. I would say is the 80s. You know, of course, I grew up, you know, early 70s, probably late 60s, like some stuff, but I really heavily got into especially the British music in the 80s. You know, that alternative scene that was coming out, and the new wave, as they call it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Another gig, I don't know if you'll remember this band, but I noticed that you played with was Pandemonium.
I don't remember that. No.
Yeah, they were another band that just kind of didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
But they had a song called "The Sun Shines from His Eyes." It's really nice, and it was another one from that Various Artists compilation that I picked up. That's how I found out a lot about a lot of these groups. You know, like was from those various artists. Well, let's talk about how you and Alan Morgan met.
I think Geranium Pond had finished, and again I may have answered an ad, and I think Alan had found me and said, "Come down to a gig that he was playing," which I think was in a town called Aylesbury, which is not actually far from where I live now, and at that time, it seemed like a long way from London, and said, "Oh, just come down and sit in with and play with the band." I can't remember even what the band were called, and I went up there, and I was a lot younger than the rest of the guys, and sat down and played, and then I can't remember what happened, whether that band then broke up, but Alan said, "Let's form a band." And I think the drummer came along with us, and one of us at some point said we could write songs. It might be me, and I'd never written a single song in my life before that. And I said, "But I can't write words," which is still the case. So he said, and Alan sort of said he could write words. Fine. So I mean, he came over to my house, and I'd written something, and we put words to it, and it sounded pretty good. So suddenly we were songwriters. And then and again, I can't remember the order that these things all happened in. We met. No, Alan knew somebody that worked at Apple, That was right. Alan actually was almost a lookalike for John Lennon. I mean, if he went out, I mean, people would mistake him for John Lennon. And he knew, I think it was Terry Doran at Apple, and because he'd been in a band before, and they'd had a record. I can't remember the name of the band. And so he introduced us, and we went up to Apple in Baker Street and they had a room upstairs with a Revox recorder, and we recorded a couple of demos up there. And somewhere along the line, we were also involved with, I think, Chappell's Publishing. Again, I can't remember the order that it all happened in. And then we found a manager, a guy, or rather, the manager found us, a guy called Tockenham Orr, who liked us. And again, you know, said, right, let's put a single in. He got us the deal with Nems. And we went into the studio and recorded a couple of songs then that we had written. And it's curious because the song, which actually I still think is a good song, was one of the very few songs I'd written on guitar. I'm a very bad guitar player. I know a few chords. I can usually start something off on the guitar, and then you think, I can't play that chord. No, I'll go onto the piano. This is one of the very, very few songs I actually wrote on the guitar. So it was very limited in terms of the music, but it worked quite well. We went into studios, which I think were Delane Lee in Holborn, I think. His memory's hazy. And we played those, and they had had a full orchestra. Okay. And I mean, and that was quite a buzz to play piano sitting in, you know, with a full orchestra. I mean, that was nice. Yeah.
What do you remember from the recording session? Was it were you a little intimidated, or was it?
Absolutely, sitting amongst these guys. Yeah, it was okay. And to a degree, having very little control over what was going on then, you know, because in a lot of the other things we'd recorded, and I think we'd done that, but the original demos, I'm trying to think that we recorded. There was a studio in Chalk Farm that belonged to Manfred Mann.
Oh, okay.
And I think they were run by a guy called, again, memory's hazy, a guy called Vic Keary, and he had us in do that. And I think the first songs we'd written, we demoed there, and they had a Mellotron.
Yeah. My favorite Mellotron is one of my. If it's not my favorite, it's one of my favorite. I love them.
And you know, the first time you're confronted with a Mellotron, it's like, why? Yeah, and it's an evil instrument to play. It's horrible. Yeah, if you're playing strings, because you've got to keep moving your fingers because the tape's wind back. You know, you don't want to hold a chord for too long.
And they are heavy. They are heavy to move around to.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we recorded these two demos, which I think were released on the Apple compilations, although we never recorded those ones at Apple. Not Sarah. And yeah, it's all Mellotron, you know. Yes, it was a novelty at the time.
I have to say that Not Sarah, that was the first Promise song that I heard, of course, from Lovers from the Sky.
Yeah.
Love that song. Love that.
That was the first song I ever wrote. You know?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that one should have been. I mean, should have gone somewhere, I think.
Yeah.
I love that. It got that waltzy kind of flavor to it. It's just real lilting. It's a great song. You know, I listened to that, going back to that quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
What other keyboard instruments did you play on that song besides the Mellotron?
Was it piano? I think that was the main. I think, as memory has it, and listening to the sound, I think that was the pianotron, that jingly I think that was the Pianotron. Sounds like it to me. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Again, it's a lovely song.
Yeah.
What you mentioned the single, just for you.
Yes.
Nice upbeat track, and
Yeah.
the vocals on that and the chorus, to me, kind of predate that '70s sound of like Edison Lighthouse,
Yeah.
Grassroots, First
Yeah.
Class, that kind of
Yeah.
really harmonic vocals.
Yeah. I mean, all I know is that we used to have shows on the radio here where the DJs would review the new singles, and it got one play on that show, and I can't remember which day DJ it was, but he hated it, and it sank without a trace. And a lot of people told us a lot of it was because it changed tempo in the middle, because you've got that lovely jazzy flute bit in the middle, and which made it not particularly radio friendly. Who knew? Who knows? Yeah. Yeah, I think you got one play and then sank without a trace. It's a shame.
Wow. Can you recall any memorable gigs with Promise? Did you play any gigs?
There weren't many. It's funny. I was, again, just we're trying to find some songs for my new band to play, because we've got a very good first set and not a particularly great second set at the moment. So we're looking for some new songs that are just easy, it's just easy wins. And I was listening to Season of the Witch, which is a Donovan song, but Brian Auger covered it. And in fact, I then listened to a version that I never even knew existed, which was Al Cooper, Stephen Stills, and Mike Bloomfield, which first time I'd ever heard that. And I can't remember, Promise never played that many gigs. And we'd fallen out with our singer, a guy called Pete Hicks. I can't remember what happened, but anyway, we'd had an argument with him and we'd thrown him out on the way to a gig. Him and his PA system on the pavement. I don't know where we were. That was it. But we had a gig to go to. Anyway, we pitched up at this gig and things like, we got no singer. That's all right. But neither Alan or I could sing. I mean, I have the worst voice in the world. So I think we started with a couple of instrumentals, and then we thought, right, we'll do one of the songs we played with Season of the Witch. And I never knew the words. So I said, we'll do Season of the Witch and I'll make it up as we go along. And we must have played a 25-minute version of Season of the Witch. It must have been awful. I can't actually imagine how bad it probably was. And I swear, somebody came up to me after the gig and said, wow, man, you're really good. Really, really like that. And I think even then, no, that had to have been crap beyond it was just made up as we went along, and I can't sing, and just bizarre, So no, we never played. Promise never really played any particularly big gigs one way or another that I can recall. And it lasted for about a year before we ran out of money, and and Alan had to get a job and whatever, and I managed to persuade my parents to support me for another year or so, and then this band Welcome came along, who were a soul band that wanted to get much rockier. I mean, they were really into Blood, Sweat and Tears and Chicago and that sort of thing. I had a brass section. And again, we went out, and I can't. It's difficult to remember the bands and the gigs we played and who we supported, but we played up and down the country quite a lot. So we did support, I think, quite a lot of bands. I mean, Welcome sounded great, but again, most of the stuff we played were covers, and we had a recording contract with Pi that we'd managed to get. And the guy at Pi that had signed us or whatever was an old band leader called Cyril Stapleton.
Yes.
And we went into the studio with Cyril to record, and it was horrible. And we just never went back. You know, we had a contract and we just never went back. And it just, again, it just fizzled. It fizzled out. Yeah. Which was a shame because they were a great sounding band.
Sounding band. I know bassist John McCoy went on
Yeah.
to play Gillan, you know, Ian.
That's
Gillan,
right.
Deep Purples, yeah.
Yeah.
That. So, well, did you see a pattern emerging here with Geranium Pond, Promise, and now Welcome, where there was no.
Yeah. I can't make anybody out of this. As a luck, well, my very close friend at school's father ran a division within Chappell's Publishing, which they call Pop Division, and Chappell's were a real old conservative, stuck in the mud publishing company with massive catalog. I mean, they published some of the greats. So Pop Division within this organization was an anomaly in itself. And they made me head of progressive music. Come out of a bat.
How progressive was Chappell's? How progressive were they?
Yeah. So I was there for about a year, and we'd signed a couple of bands, and I remember we had signed a band called Hope Street that I really, really liked, that I bought in, and we went into Abbey Road and did some sessions there, which I co-produced, which was nice. That's a nice memory to have. I produced some sessions at Abbey Road, which is nice to have in your CV at least. Sadly didn't go anywhere. In fact, most of the Pop Division stuff never really went anywhere. We were great at turning down hits. I mean, it was unique.
Abbey Studio, that's a nice studio, even at that time, right? I mean,
oh yeah, they were still, it was where the Beatles, obviously, and all those bands had. So it still was the studio. To record. To record in. Yeah. So again, so I was there for a while, and again, I think that lasted about a year or so. So again, it's difficult to remember. That stopped, and then joined briefly another band with a bass player of a band that I'd signed at Chappell's, and we met an American guy, an ex-Marine, I think, who was a drummer, and we were basically an instrumental band because none of us could sing, and we went out and played a couple of gigs on some American basses, which is just as a three-piece organ trio, really, organ, bass, and drums. But we were never going to make any money, which we plainly didn't. And my parents then actually had finally got to the point of saying, right, that's it. Get a job or get out. And I got the most amazing job in the world. And the thought when I got it, I hated it. It was working for a company that ran discotheques, and I don't know whether you're interested in that part of my of my life, but this is the most bizarre thing. And I meet this guy called Rick Dane, who's an ex-DJ from the Pirates, and I've got hair down here, and he runs discotheques for hotels and for cruise ships, and puts girl disc jockeys into all these things. So we train these girl disc jockeys. So I meet him and have an interview with him, and he says, yes, fine, start on Monday, go get a haircut. So, so instantly I'm upset. I mean, one, it's not live music and I hate discos. And secondly, I've got to go get a haircut. So anyway, so I go get a haircut. My mother is thrilled that I've got a haircut. And I turn up for work on the Monday and to start putting discotheques into hotels and with girl disc jockeys. So, and he also manages, this guy, a dance group called Love Machine, who actually were probably one of the first commercial dance groups. Right. And they had a regular residency at a notorious West End club called the Stork Group, which used to be very famous in the 50s. It was like where the aristocracy went, and and it was all. But by the early sort of 70s, mid 70s, it was mainly hostesses. I mean, you'd sit at a table, you buy champagne, and if you were lucky and you paid them enough money, you'd take them home. And despite having played in a band for 4 years, I was actually, still incredibly naive, I suppose, as to this whole new world I had been thrown into. Anyway, Love Machine danced in this club. So it takes me down to this club and said, these are the girls, you're going to be looking after them. Takes me backstage, they're all undressed, stark naked, and I'm thinking, yeah, this is good. I quite like this. This job, this could work out better than I thought. And so that was that. And then we had all these girl disc jockeys, and Richard kept another flat in London where he had a disco turntables set up that he'd use to train the girl DJs. So we train them as disc jockeys. You put a record on there, this is it. When that one finishes, you say a few words, and the next one goes on. I mean, it was pretty basic. So I'd been there a couple of weeks, and he says to me, I'm going to put you in charge of the school where we train the girls. Right. I said, I don't know anything about being a DJ. He said, it's simple. He said, like I said, you put a record on there, you say a few words, and then another one comes on. Twist it. And we'd mark all the records up, slow, medium, fast. So, so they'd program it, and we'd give them the records each week to do. So not only did I have Love Machine, I had this stream of girls coming by every week who all wanted to be disc jockeys. And it was, for a single, 21, 22, it was paradise. It was probably the best job in the entire world that anyone will ever have.
You kind of fell into that one. You just kind of fell into
it was hysterical, and I learned real business. He was a great teacher in every respect about business. I actually learned about business, which is just as well, because up until that time, as I said, I was still relatively naive as to how the world worked. Amazing.
I'm glad you shared that. See, that's the kind of stories that I like to hear about.
Yeah. It was staggering. Listen, there were stories within that I won't go into.
Okay, I got you there. I understand.
Yeah.
How long did you do that for?
I was there for about 4 years, and what that led to, actually, this then starts to get a little interesting. We were in touch with all the discotheques because we also had disc jockeys that we put in to discos, and we wanted to put equipment into the clubs. And one of the things in the clubs in England at that time is, if you had a discotheque, the Musicians Union insisted that you had a live act on as well. And what we'd do, we'd put some poor guy with a guitar on at sort of 7 o'clock in the evening when nobody was in there to play a few songs and satisfy the requirement that we had to do. And one of the jobs that I had was to find these acts, that were cheap that we would put on. So I'd ring around all of the agencies and various people, and I can't remember quite how it happened, but I'd rung somebody, and there was a girl on the end. She had a really sexy voice, and I was chatting her up and saying, whatever, and what do you do? And she says, oh, I work for a company that puts videos into discotheques. I thought, well, what do you mean? We do these compilation videos of all the pop promos, and they play on the TV sets in the discos, because there weren't big screens then. You had big TVs that you hang up on the wall. And one of the clubs that had this was probably one of the most, it was a club called Cinderella Rockefellers in Leeds, which is one of the most famous clubs at the time, and advanced. I said, oh, that sounds interesting. And I said, well, where are your offices? She said, oh, number 2, whatever. I said, literally, I can almost see your office from my office. Literally, right. It's like that, 100 yards away. Said, why don't you make me an appointment to come and see your managing director? Because at that time I was looking for another job. I'd been with, it was a company called London Town Discotheques for 4 years. And the idea was that, money would get better because you get commission from the clubs you'd done and whatever. But as fast as we got new clubs, we lost ones at the other end. So I was ready to look for something new. So I met this guy, a chap called Carl Fisher, who died sadly recently, and went up there, and they were making these compilation video cassettes, and then we were putting into clubs, and the idea was you'd rent these to the clubs and whatever. So I said, right, we got on like a house on fire, and I said, right, he said, come work for me, and we do that. Now that company, from putting those compilations in, we then discovered, because at that time you couldn't copy the videos, you'd have to go out to a big facility house to make copies, and they were incredibly expensive. And we had we had one tape machine that we'd been given from JVC, and these played the old-fashioned pneumatic cassettes, which were like, about that sort of size. And I could see in the back of this machine, I had video out and video in. So we buy another one of these, we can make our own copies. And all the engineers said, yeah, but it won't be very good quality. Yeah, but they'll work, So we put 2 machines together, and suddenly we could knock these things out cheaply. And then we got some film rights from various people and some rights to programs. And we started to sell those mainly to some of the rich Arabs that were coming in to London. And that company grew to be, before the majors came into the video cassette business, we were the pioneers of pre-recorded video cassettes. We were the first company to start selling films on video cassette, and we became actually one of the largest distributors in the world subsequently. And we actually felt at the time, funnily enough, that music would be better than films, because we thought people only don't watch films once, but they watch music shows over and over. And we signed people like, we had Elton John, Electric Light Orchestra, we had some big music acts that we'd released then on VHS finally came in, Beta came in. Those 2 machines on a desk grew to be a factory of, about 500 duplicating machines. We were the absolute pioneers of pre-recorded video. And at that time, the major studios hated us because we thought we were going to destroy the film business, of course, Right. We acquired some decent rights to some good movies. Of course, we couldn't get anything from the majors. It was only got rights from independent companies. And eventually the majors suddenly thought, well, hang on, we need to get into this business. And of course, they had all the big movies, and all of those independent companies eventually, went out of business. But for about 10 years, we grew like Topsy. I mean, it became a massive business. And I said we were probably, if not the largest distributor of video cassettes in the world, fairly close to. Interesting times.
You were there at the forefront.
We were the absolute pioneers of the video business.
Wow, and this is way before MTV, you know, ever.
Oh yeah,
Long.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other thing, just going back to the disco thing, I mean, this is technology was changing, you know, I mean, it's antique technology now. But little things that when we did, all video was done on big 2-inch master reels of tape. That was the only format that existed. So, and you'd have to record, when you edited tapes, you'd record from one 2-inch machine to another and back. I mean, it was an incredibly clumsy and expensive and very time-consuming process. So if you made a 1-hour program, it would, you know, it would take you quite a few hours, which cost a lot of money, yeah, to make that. And I remember Carl going down to one of the facility houses and looking at a machine that played commercials into the network, and they used big cartridges that held this 2-inch tape, but of course they were only, the commercial was only about 30 seconds long, you know, so they stacked this machine up with all of these cartridges to play the commercials into the network. You'd stack them up in order, and then you hit the button and the commercials would play out into the network. And Carl looked at this and thought, what if we put all the pop promos onto these cartridges? There's no reason why we can't make a 1-hour program in an hour. And we did that. And again, that was, you know, it sounds simple now and obvious, but you won't believe what a jump in technology that was at the time. Yeah. Right. You know, because these things were costing fortunes to make, you know, because you'd need like 4 or 5 hours of studio time. Yeah, and about 2 or 3 engineers, and you know, and God knows what, you know, all in white coats, of course. You know, it's insane. You know, when you think about it. And I remember we took delivery. I mean, another tape format came in, a 1-inch tape, again, big reels, 1-inch tape for your masters, and we took delivery of the very first 1-inch machine that came into the UK. So, you know, we were pretty much at the forefront in terms of technology then. I mean, you know, you look back at it and it's prehistoric stuff. I mean, but it was all absolute cutting edge at the time.
Right. Yeah. Well, it had to take someone with that kind of, you know, thought process too. I mean,
yeah.
kind of envision, you know, where you could go with it.
But we were the absolute pioneers of all of that. So that lasted for about 10 years, and again the majors came in and they had decent movies, you know, whereas we lived off exploitation stuff. And I had bought in one of the things that I'd done when I was at the disco company. We were one of the pioneers of putting disc jockeys into stores. Okay. Yeah, right. And you know, to entertain people, which is even I think goes on today. And I used to do a lot of that DJing myself. And we'd have some personal appearances in stores, and Philip Goodhand Tate was one of those personal appearances that I met Philip, and we got quite friendly. And Philip knew a bit about music publishing and legal stuff. And we needed then, it was a company called VCL, somebody that knew a bit about legal and business. And I recruited Philip into VCL, who became business manager, and looked after all of our contracts. And he had left and to join, to set up a company called Trillium Pictures, producing rock shows within another organization. And when VCL had finished, I started to work with him, representing their shows initially through my own business. I'd set up a distribution business, selling programs back to the video industry from the TV companies and various things. It was such early days then that I could walk into one of the major television broadcasters and literally say to them, you know what, I can sell your programs to so and so and so and so. And they would say, oh, Steve, yeah, there you go. You know, see what you can do with that. You know, imagine doing it these days. You know, there's the slip doors. You know, in that door straight out there. And so I'd begun to represent some of the programs that Philip was producing, and was doing incredibly well. Actually, I was making a lot of money out of that, to the point that he said, "You have to come work for us, because if you don't come work for us, we'll employ somebody in house because it's costing us too much in commission." So I joined Philip and joined Trillium Pictures and became Span Pictures, and we were probably one of the largest producers of live rock shows for TV through sort of the latter part of the 80s. And then we thought we could produce a series in America, and we produced a series in Nashville that were meant to be going out into syndication in America. And the people we were working with had clearly misled us as to how this would work. And it all sadly came to an end, which was a great shame, because actually, the programs themselves all went on to make money. But at that time, the banks foreclosed on us because the cash flow had fallen apart. But we went to Nashville and we produced the series live from Nashville, with bands like Steppenwolf, the Commodores. Oh God, what's the albino guy with the white hair?
Edgar Winter.
Edgar Winter did a show with Edgar Winter. We did quite a few great shows out there. But no, that all sadly died.
Too bad.
Yeah.
Well, this has really opened up my eyes, I'm sure our viewers, to a lot of interesting kinds of in the music industry that you've been involved with. A lot of like you said, very very cutting edge and very innovative kind of stuff. Wow. Well, what about your pantomime, your work in pantomime community theater?
Well,
how did you get involved?
I moved out of London to Oxfordshire in 1990 with my wife and kids, and was working in London. So I'd commute to London, and sadly, my first wife, 2 years after we moved out, had got cancer and she died. And so I had two boys to bring up, and I didn't really know anybody out here at all, because I'd been going to London, and my wife had obviously met people, with the kids at school and knew people, but I knew very few people, and somebody that I did know knew that I could play piano. And there was a pantomime starting up locally, and said, we need somebody to come play piano. Fine, I'll do that. So I went along and played piano for these people, and began to meet lots of people locally. And this was a panto group that was closely. I lived near a town called Bicester, and there's quite a big military base, and a lot of it that there were a lot of military people involved with that pantomime. So I was playing there. I then met the lady that was subsequently to become my wife, and she. Then there was. I live in a village called Launton, and there's a very active Am-Dram group in Launton, and I think I was playing in that pantomime, and I think I played piano in one of theirs. And she was in it, and then the next year, for some reason, I didn't play piano in it because somebody else did, or I was playing it in the other pantomime at the same time. And then eventually the other panto group packed up, and I then joined what was to become the Launton pantomime group. And these were relatively small. I mean, we're talking about playing in village halls to an audience of about 30 people or so, over a couple of nights. But then the Launton panto, I joined that, and that began to get bigger. And one day I rashly said, you know what, I can write music. why don't we write original music for the panto instead of playing all these old-fashioned songs, which were great fun. You know, all the songs I've grown up playing around the piano with my mother, you know, that we put new words to. So, and it goes, oh, God, no, 20, something like 20 years ago, 25, I've lost track. So I started to write original songs for the pantomime. And the guy that wrote these original pantomimes that were written by the guy that directed them, and he'd write the words to the songs. And I've been writing a full score pretty much every year, probably for the last 20 odd years, if not more now, for a panto. And this panto has progressively got bigger and bigger to the point where we play in a big theatre over 6 performances and probably play to a couple of thousand people. I mean, it's grown massively. And in actual fact, we're just about to launch the next one tomorrow night, because we don't put a panto on. We're very late. Pantos are generally Christmas things. Right. And we don't put ours on until February, which is unusual. There's still a few going then, but it's half term for the kids, so we don't compete. But pantomime is I don't know if you know, pantomime is a big English tradition, and it goes back to goodness when, but basically the principal boy is a girl and the main girl is a boy, and they're typically all the same. They're based around fairy tales, and they all end happily ever after. I mean, you know, this stuff happens, shit happens, all gets better, and they get married, you know. And that's usually a princess involved, and a fairy godmother, and you know, it's absolutely traditional, and there's no third wall. I mean, the audience is part of the action, and it's a massive thing in England. I mean, every regional theatre will have a pantomime at Christmas, and it'll keep their finances going for the rest of the year. And even the big theatres, even the London Palladium, will put on a pantomime. And most of these will have big stars in them. When I say big stars, usually big television personalities and whatever. Occasionally you get, I mean, I think the Royal Shakespeare did one a couple of years ago, and Ian McKellen was in it, and you know, I mean, it's a big deal, pantomime in England, and almost every local area will have an amateur dramatic group that will do a pantomime, and ours is probably one of the biggest in the country. Yeah, I write the music every year. We have a band that do it, which varies from about 4 or 5 piece, depending on how many people are available. And the group also do a summer show as well, which is usually, again, old time songs and, you know, popular stuff. We do a couple of shows a year with that. So I've been playing sort of their music since all of that began. And then a few years ago, I was talked into learning ballroom dancing by my wife, who had started. And we used to do locally. One of the biggest shows in England is a thing called Strictly Come Dancing, which you call Dancing with the Stars.
Dancing with the Stars, yeah.
In America. And we do a local version of that. Whereas those that had a few lessons would teach complete newcomers how to dance, which was a joke with me because I can hardly bloody dance in the first place. I mean, my wife is really good, you know, but I'm dreadful. So, you know, they throw this poor woman at me and say, you know, teach her to dance. You know, yeah, really. Anyway, one of her dance partners turned out to be a bass player, and he'd joined a band, and they were trying to find other members. And we met. And he said, "I've just got this band. Why don't you come and join us?" Which morphed into Space Pigs, and we formed really just before the pandemic. And we were just about ready to go out and get gigs. Yeah, and the pandemic hit, and everything went on hold. for a couple of years, and we just got back together again recently, and we're just about getting ready for gigs. And we've been out, we've seen on the videos that we did recently, we're out playing, and I'm in a band again. So playing music I love. Yeah.
I've watched a few of those videos on
Yeah.
YouTube, and I think I commented to you that you guys are really tight band, and you really can tickle the ivories. You're still the ivory, and I love the songs that you guys played too. The ones that I watched.
Yeah.
Really some of my favorite songs. When I saw the name Space Pigs, I thought of, are you familiar with Hawkwind, the band Hawkwind?
Yes, yeah.
And I thought, that sounds like a Hawkwind song.
Yeah. Well, there's a funny story behind Space Pigs. I mean, the bass player is a guy called Angelo, and he's Italian. And the original name of the band was Pigs in Space, which was taken from the Muppet Show. But Angelo had never ever heard or seen the Muppets or the Muppet movie, so he knew nothing about pigs in space. And he did some publicity for us, and we became Space Pigs. And all right, so we're now Space Pigs.
That's how it turned.
That's how it happened.
That's how it happened. Yeah, you guys. How many gigs do you guys?
Very few. We've only been out a couple of times, and literally we're just about gig ready again. In fact, we've only got at the moment a sensible 45-minute set, and in fact, because we've been out a couple of times, people are seeing us, and we're beginning to get some bookings. So this week and next week, we desperately need to get a second set sorted, which we can do. We've got enough song, we've got enough material. We just haven't really refined it yet. But I hope we'll be playing regularly. Within sort of the next few weeks or so. It's all in respect relatively quite new in that respect. Although, as I said, we've been together, it's probably 3 years, but of course in the middle, nobody could go out. We didn't do anything for like a year and a half, or almost 2 years. Yeah. So did you stay healthy through the lockdown? I got COVID, but I was lucky. I got it very, very mildly, and my wife as well. So we escaped quite easily, and I hope it stays that way. I mean, I've got my booster shot in a few weeks, so hopefully that will sort me out. But no, I mean, we've known people that it's affected quite badly, and so we're of an age, that's the trouble.
I thought I was going to escape it because I had both of my shots and everything, and I hadn't, healthy and all that. And then this was about 3-4 weeks ago, maybe now.
Yeah.
I went out somewhere and then came back home and started coughing,
Yeah.
And that's what it was. And so for 4 weeks there, I was, not great, but I was, like you said.
No, I was lucky. I got off very lightly. My wife had it slightly worse than me, but again, not terrible.
Right.
So we'll see what the future brings. And I'm sort of back into music again. I was going to retire. I was working for a company that helped to set up TV channels for people. And of course, we're in an arena now where all these fast channels and TV have come along. I've been heavily involved in all of that. And so I set up a consultancy to help people do that, thinking I'm not going to get any work. If I go earn a few pounds, that would be nice because I can retire. And it sort of exploded. And then the company, in fact, that I had been working for, called me back in to run stuff for them. They've just sold that company to another, and I suddenly find myself head of programming for a full-on TV channel. And a lot of what they do is music. And so I've been looking for a lot of music. I'm amazed because I thought I knew almost where all the old, particularly 60s music shows were buried and whatever. And literally last week, I came across a show that I'd never heard of that has got an American show that's got the most staggering list of acts. You probably know it, called Hullabaloo.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of it? I'd never heard of it. I was looking at all these tracks. I mean, they've even got the Beatles and the Stones in there. I was just thinking, how come we've never seen this? You know?
It was a big deal. It was a big deal for a while.
Yeah. And looks like the rights are cleared. I mean, we show a lot of music on this channel because it's relatively inexpensive for us. And then we put our bigger shows on in the evening. And it's basically vintage. Our audience is 50, 60 age group plus. So, you know, we're going into the old BBC archives and getting shows from there. But we run sort of jukebox music programming a lot of the time during the day. We call that 60s, that's 70s, that's 80s. So we're looking for music for that. And we've just set up another channel called Classic Hits. So again, music programming for that. And again, we're getting just involved in that whole area of fast channels and streaming. So I'm working harder than when I was working. I think this is insane. What happened? Which I have to say, I do enjoy. I mean, my wife still works, and it'd be maybe different if she'd retired as well, and we both had nothing to do. But no, it's busy, and I'm in the thick of it, which I love.
Right. I was going to say that it must be very enjoyable for you, to stay in the music business and doing that kind of programming. I think even though the bands and that side of it didn't really pan out, I think what you've done since then has been very rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. So you've been lucky to still stay in that business.
Yeah. Very. Yeah.
Very fortunate.
Yeah.
To do what you enjoy, to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned your wife. Would you like to talk a little bit about you said you had a couple of sons?
We've got 4 boys. Yeah. I mean, two boys from my first marriage, and Jackie had 2 young boys when we got together. 2 of them in musical, one more so than the other. I mean, one of the boys is a chef and plays, and he's just joined a band. In fact, he's just bought a new keyboard. So he's been talking to me about
I was going to say,
what amplifier do I get? What's this? How
Right,
does this work? How does that work? And he plays guitar as well. So he's playing in a band. But the others have not really, done much with it.
Right.
So,
What about interest outside of music?
I don't have much time for anything else. Everything. I mean, I live in a little village, and there's quite a village community. So there's always things going on in terms of that, various committees and various things, and we're quite involved with all of that. Yeah, I mean, that's really my main interest, and I also run, never got time. I also run a local rock choir as well. So by Tuesday evenings, with that, there's about sort of 14 people come along to that, and we play songs, and we go out and sing, usually for charity and things, and particularly around Christmas, we do a Christmas song thing. Not so much carols, because other people do the carols, but everything from White Christmas to Rocking Around the Christmas Tree, and Santa Claus is Coming to Town, that sort of stuff. So we'll normally play a few things around Christmas for various charities and various things. So that there's a lot of music involved. I get to this time of year. So Mondays is Space Pigs practice. Tuesdays is rock chorus. Sundays is pantomime. Yeah. And then as we get closer to panto, it'll be 2 rehearsals for panto a week. So
You're not.
it could
You're
it
not
could get
slowing
quite
down.
full on. I'm not short of things to do. You know.
You haven't slowed down a bit. It sounds like.
No. Yeah.
Well,
The only thing that's happened is that the kit has got heavier. You know,
okay.
who would be a
Yeah.
keyboard player? You
Isn't
know,
that-
I
isn't that
mean, you
interesting how that
know,
happens?
guys turn up holding a guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Right.
you know, whereas even when there's a back line, I've still got to take my amplifiers along because I need, you know,
Right.
my stuff, you know,
Right.
and it's heavy.
It is. You're thinking, wasn't it smaller and lighter back in the day? You know.
No, it was heavier. Yeah, well, 'cause it's the big Hammonds weighed
Right. Oh, yeah.
stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, I've actually got what they call a clone wheel Hammond,
Mhm.
which they managed to simulate the sound. I mean, the Hammond was the last instrument that electronically people were able to reproduce, because it was an electromechanical instrument and had so many quirks. All the engineers tried to clean up the sound, you know, because an engineer looked at it and said, no, this is terrible. There's loads of crap in this sound and whatever, you know, we'll fix this. But of course, what gave it that beautiful sound was because it had all that rubbish in it, you know, and that's what gave it the sound. And it took them ages to reproduce it. And also the Leslie cabinet with the spinning speakers that sped up and slowed down, you know, and again, that was a box, like, you know, massive thing you'd used to have to carry around with you, you know, back in the day. It was insane. I mean, the purists will still insist that an old Hammond is still the best, and they're probably right. And there are still, you know, the B3 Hammond organ is still, you know, the measure of everything. And there are a lot of bands that will still carry a B3 vintage Hammond around, and you still through them, but they haven't been made for years. I mean, they'll become like, you know, Stradivarius violins one day. But the clones now are pretty good that they've copied, and I've got one of those, and it sounds fine. As I said, if you're a purist, you'll say, you know, it's not quite as good, but it does the job, you know.
Well, are you prepared or set up to play a little something? Take us out. Or, I mean, if you're not,
I can. If the only trouble is that
Yeah.
keyboard needs the computer, whereas if you can see me, if I can turn that
right, I can see that
around. You bit of not Sarah.
Yeah.
I can't remember. It goes. Maybe I won't play that because I can't remember how it goes. I know. Can't remember how it goes after that.
And the audience roars. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Can you think of anything else you'd like to add?
There's loads. We could go on all day. But no, I mean, I think you've had the high points. Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, I do appreciate your time and in visiting with us, and continued success and staying busy. And it sounds like you are. And And best of luck with Space Pigs
Thank you.
and also the pantomime as well, and everything else. It's been a real treat talking to you and visiting with you, and thank you for your time and for brushing off some of those cobwebs.
Yeah. You made me remember things that I hadn't thought about for a long time.
All righty.
Great.
And,
Lovely. Let me know when this goes up live or whatever, and I'll look out for it. Okay.
I will. All right. Appreciate it. Thank you, Steve.
Lovely. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.